I never imagined the man I married would lay his hands on me, let alone for something as trivial as money. But when my husband hit me and told me to leave, he had no idea I'd land on my feet and that I'd soon become the one person he'd have to answer to. A week later, when he walked into my office, he fell to his knees in shock. And that's when I told him. The fight began over something I thought was a step towards securing our future, but it quickly unraveled into something far darker. For years, I had been setting aside money for my job, slowly building a savings account with the dream of creating something that would truly be mine. I never intended to keep it a secret from my husband. I just didn't see the need to announce every deposit or plan until it was solidified. When an opportunity arose to invest in a promising bank startup, I spent weeks doing my homework. I read everything I could find, combed through the fine print, and even consulted a friend who worked in finance. It seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime chance, one that could potentially multiply my savings and set us up for a better future. I kept it quiet, not out of deceit, but because I wanted it to be a surprise. I pictured the day I could tell him, "Look what I did for us." I wanted to see his face light up with pride. Instead, when I finally shared the news, his reaction was the furthest thing from pride. It was a quiet evening at home when I decided to bring it up. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and I thought the relaxed atmosphere would be the perfect time. "I have something to tell you," I began, my voice steady, but laced with nervous excitement. "You know the savings account I've been building? Well, I made an investment." He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, investments?" "I put the money into a bank startup. It's a really solid opportunity. If it takes off, it could be huge for us," I explained, handing him a printout of the details. His expression darkened as he skimmed the paper. Then, without warning, he slammed it onto the coffee table. "How dare you spend that money, you witch?" he bellowed, his face flushing with anger. I was stunned. "What? I thought you'd be happy. This is for us, for our future." "For us?" he sneered. "That money wasn't yours to throw away. I was going to use it to buy a car for my sister." It took me a moment to process what he had said. A car for his sister? The money I had spent years saving was for our family, not his sister's whims. "You didn't even talk to me about that," I said, my voice trembling. His face twisted with rage. "Because it wasn't up for discussion. You don't get to make decisions like this without my permission." Before I could respond, he lashed out, his hand striking me hard in the stomach. The impact knocked the air out of me, and I crumpled to the floor, clutching my abdomen as pain radiated through my body. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare up at him in shock. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man I had built a life with. As I struggled to get up, he loomed over me, his expression cold and unfeeling. "I want you out of here." "Now," he spat. "Pack your things and leave." His words cut deeper than the physical pain. He didn't see me as his partner, his equal, or even as a person in that moment. I was just an obstacle in his way, someone to be discarded when I no longer served his needs. I pulled myself to my feet, my body trembling as I fought back tears. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Without a word, I went to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and began packing. Every item I stuffed into that bag felt like a piece of my life slipping away. As I zipped up the suitcase, I paused for a moment, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. I could stay and fight, try to salvage something from the ruins of our marriage, but at what cost? The man who had promised to love and protect me had just raised his hand against me. That wasn't something I could forgive. When I walked out of the house that night, I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being treated like I didn't matter. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of something I thought I had lost: freedom. After my husband stormed out, leaving me on the floor clutching my stomach, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My marriage, the partnership I had believed in for years, was over. Not in the slow, painful way that relationships sometimes drift apart, but in a single moment of violence that shattered every illusion I had about the man I thought I knew. For what felt like hours, I sat there on the cold floor, staring at nothing. A part of me was frozen in disbelief, replaying his words and actions in my head. How could someone who once claimed to love me treat me like that? Another part of me was burning with anger, not just at him, but at myself for not seeing it sooner. Then, something inside me shifted. It was like a spark ignited deep in my chest, burning away the fear and self-doubt. I wasn't going to stay in a place where I wasn't wanted, and I certainly wasn't going to let someone who hurt me dictate the rest of my life. I stood up, wiped my face, and made a decision. I was leaving. I packed a bag in silence, methodically folding clothes and gathering my essentials. Every item I placed in that suitcase felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. As I zipped it shut, I glanced around the room one last time. This house, once filled with memories, now felt like a prison. Grabbing my laptop, I left without looking back. I didn't cry, I couldn't. The anger simmering inside me wouldn't let me waste my energy on tears. I walked out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap, but it felt good. It felt real. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with outdated floral bedspreads and flickering neon signs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my surroundings. Sitting on the lumpy bed, I opened my laptop, desperate for some kind of distraction. That's when I saw it, a notification in my email inbox. It was from the bank investment I had made, the one that had sparked the fight in the first place. My heart pounded as I clicked on it, half expecting bad news. What I saw left me breathless. The email detailed the latest developments in the bank startup. They had just secured a major partnership with a well-known corporation, and the value of my investment had skyrocketed overnight. The amount listed in my account balance didn't seem real. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't just a win, it was a lifeline. For so long, I had let myself believe that my financial stability was tied to my husband, that I needed him to build a future. But here it was, proof that I was capable of creating something for myself. The money wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was freedom, opportunity, and a second chance. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading the email, trying to wrap my head around the implications. With this money, I could start fresh. I could leave this town, this painful chapter of my life, behind. But as the night wore on, a different thought began to take shape in my mind. Why should I run away? Why not use this opportunity to rebuild my life, right here? The thought of starting over in the same city where my husband thought he had the upper hand felt bold, even reckless, but it also felt right. By the time the sun began to rise, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I was going to take this opportunity and turn it into something bigger than I had ever dreamed. My husband thought he had broken me, but he was about to learn just how wrong he was. With a newfound sense of purpose, I started making calls. I reached out to the bank startup directly, explaining who I was and my early investment in their company. To my surprise, they were eager to meet with me. Your support was instrumental in helping us get off the ground, the email read. We'd love to discuss how we can involve you in our future plans. It was the first step in a journey I never saw coming. But as I packed up my things and left the motel, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. My life wasn't over, it was just beginning. The email was the validation I hadn't realized I needed. Every doubt I'd had about my decision to invest, every pang of guilt from not telling my husband sooner, vanished as I reread the words on my screen. The bank startup I had believed in had landed a groundbreaking partnership, and my modest savings had transformed into a life-altering sum. I sat there for a long time trying to process what this meant. The sheer amount of money in my account seemed unreal. It was more than just a financial gain. It was freedom, independence, and the ability to choose my next steps without anyone's permission. The weight of my newfound independence was almost overwhelming. Part of me wanted to pack my things and leave the city entirely, start fresh in a place where no one knew me or my story. But as I stared at the email, a different idea began to take shape. Why should I run? Why should I leave the life I'd built, the network I'd nurtured, just because of one man's betrayal? No. This was my home, my city, and I wasn't going to let my ex-husband's actions drive me away. Instead, I would stay and use this opportunity to rebuild my life on my terms. That night, as I lay in bed, the beginnings of a plan started to form in my mind. The email mentioned that the startup valued its early investors and was exploring ways to involve them in the company's future. The words seemed like an open door, an invitation to be more than just an observer. The next morning, with a mix of nerves and excitement, I emailed the company directly. I introduced myself as one of their earliest investors, someone who had believed in their vision when they were just starting out. I explained that I had followed their journey closely and was interested in contributing to their success in a more meaningful way. To my surprise, they responded quickly. The tone of their reply was warm and enthusiastic. "Thank you for reaching out," the email read. Your early investment was instrumental in helping us get where we are today. We'd love to meet and discuss how we can collaborate moving forward." My heart raced as I read the message. This wasn't just an acknowledgement of my financial contribution. It was an invitation to step into a new role, one that I had never imagined for myself. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at their downtown office. In the days leading up to it, I poured myself into research. I wanted to walk into that room prepared, confident, and ready to show them that I was more than just an investor. I studied the company's history, its leadership team, and its future goals. When the day of the meeting arrived, I dressed in my best business attire, a sleek black blazer and matching slacks that made me feel powerful. As I walked into their modern, glass-walled office, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. I had come here on my own terms, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. The meeting itself was a whirlwind. The founders were young, driven, and brimming with enthusiasm for their company's future. They were genuinely interested in my perspective as an early investor and impressed by my knowledge of their industry. "We're looking for people who share our vision," one of them said. "Your belief in us early on shows that you understand what we're trying to build. Have you ever considered taking a more active role in the company?" The question caught me off guard. I had walked into the meeting hoping to offer my insights or contribute in some small way, but this was an entirely different level of involvement. "What kind of role are we talking about?" I asked cautiously. "We're expanding our board of directors," the founder explained. "We want people who not only bring financial expertise, but also believe in our mission. Based on what we've seen and heard from you, we think you'd be a great fit." I was stunned. Me? A board member? It felt like a dream, but as I sat there, listening to them outline their vision for the company, I realized that this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a chance to redefine who I was. I accepted their offer that day. Walking out of that office, I felt like a completely different person than the one who had packed a bag and left her husband just days earlier. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer be defined by anyone else's expectations. As I stepped onto the bustling city street, the sun shining down on me, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward, and the future was mine to create. The founders of the startup weren't what I expected. They were young, yes, but they had a clear vision and an energy that was contagious. During our first few meetings, I noticed how their eyes lit up when they talked about the future of their company. What surprised me most was how seriously they took me. I had walked into their office expecting to be treated like just another investor, a silent partner in the background. Instead, they listened intently to my thoughts and treated me as an equal. "What you've done," one of the founders said during our second meeting, "believing in us when no one else would, speaks volumes. It's not just about the money. You understood what we were trying to build from the beginning." Their respect and admiration gave me confidence, but when they offered me a seat on their board of directors, I froze. It felt surreal, like they were talking to someone else. Me? A board member? The idea seemed almost absurd. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hesitant. "I don't have a background in business. What if I don't know enough to be helpful?" One of the founders, a woman about my age, leaned forward and gave me a reassuring smile. "What you bring to the table isn't just financial knowledge. You have instincts, drive, and a perspective we need. We'll support you every step of the way." Her words stuck with me long after the meeting ended. I spent that night thinking about all the reasons I couldn't do it, all the doubts and insecurities that whispered in the back of my mind. But then I thought about everything I had endured to get here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights spent wondering if I would ever feel whole again. If I could survive that, I could survive this. I accepted their offer the next day, and my life changed almost immediately. Becoming a board member wasn't just a title, it was a crash course in leadership. I threw myself into learning everything I could about the business world. I attended workshops, read books, and spent countless hours researching the banking industry. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Sitting in meetings with seasoned professionals who spoke in jargon I didn't fully understand was intimidating, to say the least. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. Every time I encountered something I didn't know, I asked questions, lots of them. I wasn't afraid to admit when I didn't understand something, because I knew that's how I would learn. The team noticed my dedication. One of the senior board members pulled me aside after a particularly intense strategy meeting and said, "You're a quick study. Don't sell yourself short. You belong here." Those words became a mantra for me. Every time I felt out of my depth, I reminded myself that I had earned my place at that table. It wasn't long before I started to find my footing. I began contributing ideas that were taken seriously, and my confidence grew with each meeting. When the founders asked for input on a new marketing strategy, I suggested a campaign that highlighted the startup's commitment to small investors, people like me who had taken a chance on them. The campaign was a huge success, and it became a cornerstone of the company's branding. For the first time in years, I felt like I was thriving. I wasn't just surviving, I was building something, not just for myself, but for the future. What amazed me most was how fulfilling the work was. I wasn't just helping the company grow, I was proving to myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined. Every late night spent poring over spreadsheets, every nervous question I asked in meetings, every victory, big or small, felt like a step toward reclaiming my power. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of self-doubt, times when I wondered if I had taken on too much. But every time I faced a challenge, I thought back to the version of myself who had walked out of her marriage with nothing but a suitcase and a laptop. That woman had survived, and so would I. By the end of my first quarter on the board, I had gone from feeling like an outsider to being one of the company's key players. I had earned the respect of my colleagues, and my voice carried weight in every decision we made. More than anything, I had earned my own respect. Standing in front of a packed conference room during a quarterly review, presenting our latest successes and future plans, I felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. This was my life now, a life I had built from the ground up, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. My life had taken a drastic turn since I stepped into my role on the board of directors. Each day was a whirlwind of strategy meetings, decision-making, and brainstorming sessions. I loved every second of it. But as fulfilling as my work was, I had chosen to keep my success quiet, at least for the time being. It wasn't out of fear or insecurity. I just wasn't ready for the inevitable questions and opinions that would come once people knew where I had landed. Besides, I didn't want to give my ex-husband the satisfaction of knowing how well I was doing. Not yet. But it's hard to stay anonymous when you're part of a rapidly growing company. News of the startup's success was everywhere, articles in financial magazines, interviews with the founders, and posts circulating on social media. People started connecting the dots, and it wasn't long before word got out that I was a key figure in the company's rise. It started subtly. Old colleagues and acquaintances began reaching out, congratulating me on my new role. At first, I was flattered, but then I realized what this meant. If people in my circle knew, it was only a matter of time before my ex-husband found out. Sure enough, the calls began. The first time I saw his name flash across my phone screen, I froze. For a moment, I considered answering just to see what he had to say. But then I remembered the way he had looked at me that night, the words he had spat in anger, and the way he had dismissed me like I was nothing. I let the call go to voicemail. When I listened to the message later, his tone caught me off guard. It wasn't angry or accusatory like I had expected. It was desperate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "I think we can work things out. Please call me back." I stared at my phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was a part of me that wanted to laugh at the audacity of his words. Work things out? After everything he had done? But another part of me felt something deeper, pity, maybe, or just the cold satisfaction of knowing that he now understood what he had lost. The voicemails kept coming over the next few days. Each one sounded more desperate than the last. He talked about how sorry he was, how he had been under stress, how he wanted a chance to explain. "I made a mistake," one message said. "I see that now. We were good together, weren't we? Don't throw that away." It was laughable, really. He was trying to rewrite history, painting our marriage as something idyllic when the truth was far from it. I didn't need to hear his explanations or his apologies. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him drag me back into his orbit. Still, the calls were a reminder of something I couldn't ignore. Our paths were bound to cross again eventually. The company was gaining visibility, and with our headquarters located in the same city, it was only a matter of time before we ended up in the same room. When that day came, I wanted to be ready. Instead of letting his calls distract me, I poured my energy into my work. I focused on the projects that excited me, the goals I was helping the company achieve, and the team I was growing to love. My life was full in a way it hadn't been in years, and I wasn't about to let my ex-husband derail that. But deep down, I couldn't help but imagine the moment when we would finally face each other again. How would he react when he saw me? Not as the woman he had dismissed, but as someone who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. The thought didn't fill me with dread. It filled me with determination. For years, I had let him dictate how I saw myself. He had chipped away at my confidence, made me doubt my worth, and convinced me that I needed him to survive. But now I knew better. I had proved to myself that I was capable of so much more than he had ever given me credit for. As I sat in my office one evening, reviewing a proposal for a new project, my phone buzzed with another call from him. I let it go to voicemail, as I had every other time. But this time, I didn't even feel the urge to listen to the message. Whatever he had to say, it didn't matter. I had already won. And when the day came that we finally met again, I wouldn't need to say a word to prove it. My success would speak for itself. It was an ordinary day in my new life, or as ordinary as things could be given how far I had come. The startup had grown rapidly, and with it, so had my responsibilities. My role as a board member had expanded, and the founders increasingly sought my input on major decisions. Eventually, they offered me the position of interim CEO while the company navigated a critical growth phase. It was a role I never dreamed I'd hold, and yet, as I sat behind the expansive oak desk, reviewing reports and preparing for the next round of investor meetings, I felt like I belonged. This was my domain now, a testament to everything I had fought for and earned. The intercom on my desk buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. "Ma'am," my assistant's voice came through. "There's someone here asking to speak with the CEO. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's very insistent." I frowned, glancing at my packed schedule. "What's his name?" "His name is Mr. Carter," she replied hesitantly. I froze, my pen hovering over the page. Carter, my ex-husband. The name stirred a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and an undeniable sense of satisfaction. He had found me, just as I knew he eventually would. "Send him in," I said after a moment, my voice steady. The door opened, and in walked the man I had once shared a life with. He looked older, more tired, with lines etched into his face that hadn't been there before. His confident stride faltered slightly as he glanced around the room, clearly out of his depth in the sleek, professional atmosphere. He didn't recognize me at first. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his tone surprisingly humble. "I'm here to discuss a potential business opportunity with your company." I leaned back in my chair, saying nothing as he continued his pitch. He was there to plead for help, whether it was a loan, a partnership, or a favor I didn't know yet. What I did know was that he had no idea who he was talking to. "I've been following this company's growth," he said, trying to sound knowledgeable. "You've done an impressive job, and I think I can bring some value to the table." It wasn't until I shifted slightly in my chair that he looked up and froze. His eyes locked on mine, confusion flickering across his face before recognition set in. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, me," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "I'm the CEO you've been waiting to meet." His face went pale, and for a moment, he seemed incapable of speech. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, his expression a mix of shock and panic. Finally, he stammered, I didn't know. I had no idea." I let the silence stretch, watching as he struggled to find his footing. His confidence had crumbled, and now, he stood before me not as the man who had belittled and hurt me, but as someone desperate and powerless. Then, to my surprise, he dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry for everything I did. Please, you have to understand, I wasn't myself back then. I made mistakes, but I've changed. Please forgive me." The sight of him groveling would have once filled me with satisfaction, but now, it felt almost pathetic. He wasn't apologizing out of genuine remorse, he was apologizing because he needed something from me. "You're in my office," I said, leaning forward slightly. My voice was steady, controlled. "And I'm the one you'll have to answer to now." His face crumpled, and he clasped his hands together as if begging for mercy. "Please," he said again. "I didn't know it was you. I thought maybe we could work something out." "Work something out?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Like the way you work things out when you hit me and told me to leave? Or when you dismissed everything I ever did for us like it didn't matter?" He flinched at my words, but said nothing. I stood, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "You didn't respect me then, and now you expect me to help you? What makes you think you deserve anything from me?" He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I know I was wrong. I've lost everything, and I just want a chance to make things right." I crossed my arms, staring down at him. "This isn't about making things right," I said. This is about you trying to fix your mess because you think I can save you. But here's the thing, I don't owe you anything. Not my forgiveness, not my help, and certainly not my time. I turned and walked back to my desk, gesturing toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real work to do. For a moment, he didn't move, as if hoping I might change my mind. When it became clear that I wouldn't, he got to his feet, his shoulders slumped. Without another word, he turned and left the room. As the door closed behind him, I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. I had faced him, and I had won, not by tearing him down but by standing tall and refusing to let him have any power over me. This wasn't just closure, it was a new beginning. And as I sat back in my chair, I realized that I had finally reclaimed the life he had tried to take from me. The look on his face was etched into my memory before he even said a word. Shock, disbelief, fear. It was a cocktail of emotions I hadn't expected to witness from a man who had once seemed so sure of himself. His mouth opened, but the words faltered as if he were struggling to piece together what he was seeing. I didn't know, he finally stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't realize. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the desk, cutting him off before he could finish. You didn't care, I said, my voice sharp and steady. You didn't care about my dreams, my potential, or even my safety. You only cared about yourself. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. I could see him trying to form a response, his lips twitching as if searching for the right thing to say. But there was nothing he could say that would undo the damage he had caused. I made a mistake, he managed, his tone more desperate than apologetic. I wasn't myself back then. I was under a lot of pressure, work, family, everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me? I repeated, incredulous. You hit me. You threw me out of the house we built together without a second thought. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And now you want to stand here and act like none of it happened? He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. I know I messed up, he muttered. But we had something once, didn't we? Can't we just move past this? The audacity of his words left me momentarily speechless. Move past this? As if the pain and betrayal I had endured could be swept under the rug with a simple apology. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice rising slightly. This isn't about me holding a grudge or refusing to forgive. This is about accountability. You hurt me in ways you can't even begin to understand, and now you're here because you need something from me. Not because you care, not because you're sorry, but because you're desperate. He flinched as if my words had physically struck him. That's not true, he insisted, though the cracks in his voice betrayed him. Isn't it? I asked, raising an eyebrow. If you didn't need something, would you even be here right now? He hesitated, the silence between us answering the question for him. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms as I studied him. This man, who had once tried to control me, belittle me, and make me feel small, was now standing in front of me, stripped of his power. It was a sight I never thought I'd see, and yet, it didn't bring me the satisfaction I had imagined. This isn't about revenge, I said finally, my tone softer but still firm. I've moved on. I've rebuilt my life, and I'm proud of where I am. But if you think I'm going to help you after what you did to me, you're delusional. He started to say something, but I held up a hand to stop him. No, I said, cutting him off. You've had your chance to speak, and I've heard enough. Now get out of my office before I call security. The finality in my voice left no room for argument. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of regret and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that I was the one in control now. Slowly, he nodded, his shoulders slumping as he turned toward the door. For a moment, I watched him walk away, the man who had once loomed so large in my life now reduced to a shadow of his former self. It was a strange feeling, not triumphant, but liberating. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about reclaiming my power, my voice, and my dignity. I returned to my desk, the weight of the encounter already beginning to lift. There was no going back, no reopening old wounds or rehashing the past. My life had moved forward, and I wasn't about to let anyone pull me back. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And as I turned my attention back to the work that awaited me, I realized that the chapter 1 had closed wasn't just about my ex-husband. It was about me choosing myself. And that, more than anything, was the victory I had been waiting for. Watching him walk out of my office was like watching a chapter of my life close in real time. For years, I had carried the weight of his words and actions, letting them seep into the way I saw myself. He had made me feel small, unworthy, and powerless, but now, the roles were reversed. I was the one in control, not over him, but over my own life. As the door clicked shut behind him, I sat back in my chair and let the moment sink in. The air in the room felt lighter, as if his presence had been the final shadow I needed to dispel. This wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about reclaiming my power and reminding myself that I was worth so much more than the limits he had tried to place on me. I thought about the woman I had been when I left him, the one who packed her belongings in a daze, unsure of what the future held. That version of me couldn't have imagined this moment, couldn't have foreseen that I would one day sit behind the desk of a CEO, calmly asserting my boundaries and refusing to let anyone diminish my worth. As I looked around my office, the magnitude of how far I had come began to hit me. This wasn't just a job or a title, it was the culmination of every hard choice, every late night, and every ounce of determination I had poured into rebuilding my life. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the buildings below. It felt symbolic, as if the day itself was marking the end of one chapter and the start of another. The next morning, I arrived at work with a renewed sense of purpose. There was no lingering bitterness from the encounter with my ex-husband, no second-guessing or replaying the events in my mind. Instead, I felt focused, energized by the knowledge that I had finally let go of the last remnants of my old life. I poured myself into my work with even more enthusiasm, tackling projects with a clarity and drive that surprised even me. My team noticed the shift. "You seem different," one of my colleagues said during a meeting. "More confident, more grounded." "Thank you," I replied with a smile. I think I finally let go of some things that were holding me back. It wasn't just about the work, though. Reclaiming my power extended into every area of my life. I started reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with, people who had been there for me during the hardest times, but whom I had unintentionally distanced myself from. I began exploring new hobbies, trying things I had always wanted to do, but never felt I had the time or permission for. One evening, as I sat at home flipping through an old journal, I found an entry from the night I had left my ex-husband. The handwriting was shaky, the words scattered and uncertain. I had written about my fear of the unknown, my doubt that I could ever rebuild my life. I traced my finger over the words, remembering how hopeless I had felt in that moment. But now, looking back, I felt nothing but pride. That woman who had doubted herself had taken the first step, and every step after that had brought me to where I was today. From that day forward, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't waste any more time looking back. The past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. In the months that followed, the company continued to thrive, and so did I. Opportunities one never dreamed of began to present themselves, speaking engagements, partnerships, and even the chance to mentor other women navigating their own journeys of resilience and growth. Each success felt like a reminder that I had made the right choice. I had chosen to believe in myself, to fight for a future that was entirely my own, and to refuse to let anyone else dictate my worth. Sitting in my office one evening, reviewing the latest reports, I realized that closure isn't about erasing the past or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about making peace with what was and using it as a foundation for what comes next. And as I closed my laptop and prepared to head home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the pain I had endured, but for the strength it had given me. My story wasn't one of revenge or bitterness. It was one of growth, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. This was my life now. And I wasn't just living it, I was thriving. Time has a way of reshaping your world, piece by piece, until you wake up one day and realize how far you've come. That was how it felt as I watched my life unfold in the years after taking control of my own destiny. I found myself surrounded by people who didn't just tolerate me or expect me to shrink to fit their needs. They truly respected and valued me. The startup I had taken a chance on wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Under my leadership, we expanded rapidly, breaking into markets that once seemed out of reach. Our name became synonymous with innovation and trust, and as the company's success grew, so did my confidence in my abilities. Eventually, the interim title was dropped, and I officially became the CEO. It was a moment I would never forget, standing in front of the entire team as the founders handed over the reins. "You've earned this," one of them said, beaming with pride. We couldn't think of anyone better to lead us into the future. It wasn't just a job. It was a testament to everything I had fought for and everything I had become. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was redefining it on my terms. The transformation wasn't limited to my career. I began exploring other parts of my life that had long been neglected. I rekindled old friendships, the kind I had let fade away during my marriage when I was too consumed by trying to keep the peace at home. Those friends welcomed me back with open arms, and it felt like rediscovering a part of myself I had almost forgotten. I even started dating again, though this time I approached relationships with a much different mindset. Gone were the days of ignoring red flags or sacrificing my own happiness to keep someone else comfortable. I had learned the hard way that love should never come at the expense of your self-worth. It wasn't easy at first. I found myself second-guessing people's intentions, wondering if they saw me as an equal or as someone to manipulate. But over time, I realized that the right kind of people didn't need me to prove anything. They saw my strength and appreciated it without feeling threatened. One relationship stood out. It started slowly, over coffee dates and shared conversations about everything from books to travel. He was kind, patient, and supportive in ways I hadn't known were possible. More importantly, he didn't just admire my independence, he encouraged it. "This is your world," he said one night as we walked through the park. "I'm just lucky to be a part of it." Hearing those words was a revelation. For so long, I had thought love meant compromising parts of yourself for someone else. Now I understood that real love amplified who you were instead of diminishing you. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about my ex-husband. Mutual acquaintances would mention that he was struggling, financial troubles, failed ventures, and a string of relationships that never seemed to last. I heard once that he had tried to reach out to me again, but by then, I had changed my number and moved on. There was a time when the thought of him regretting losing me would have filled me with satisfaction. But now, his opinion didn't matter. His presence or absence was no longer a factor in my life. I had built something far more meaningful than the life I had once shared with him. Instead, I focused on the present and the people who mattered. The team at the company had become like a second family, and our shared victories felt like a collective triumph. We celebrated every milestone together, from landing major clients to opening new offices around the country. One evening, as I stood on stage at an industry awards event, accepting recognition for our company's achievements, I felt a wave of gratitude. This wasn't just about the work we had done. It was about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the woman who had packed her bags and walked out of her marriage, unsure of where she was headed, but determined not to look back. That version of me had been scared, but she had also been brave. Without her courage, none of this would have been possible. The applause from the audience brought me back to the present, and I smiled, not just for them, but for myself. This life, this success, this happiness, it was all mine. As the years went by, the memories of my past faded into the background. They were still there, of course, like old photographs tucked away in a drawer. But they no longer defined me. I had built a life that was rich with meaning, filled with love, respect, and a sense of purpose that went far beyond anything I had imagined. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly whole. What surprised me most wasn't just that I had survived, it was that I had thrived. My story wasn't one of loss or regret. It was a story of resilience, strength, and the power of choosing yourself. In the end, I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was living it fully, deeply, and unapologetically. Now, as I stand at the helm of a company I helped build, I can finally say I'm proud of who I've become. My office, perched on one of the upper floors of a sleek downtown building, is more than just a workplace. It's a symbol of everything I've fought for. From the glass walls overlooking the city to the framed accolades on the shelves, it's a reminder that every step of my journey has led me here. The road wasn't easy. It was filled with moments of doubt, fear, and heartbreak. But those moments didn't define me. What defined me was the resilience I found within myself, the ability to take each challenge and turn it into an opportunity to grow. Every late night spent working, every difficult decision, every uncomfortable confrontation taught me something valuable about who I was and what I was capable of. The woman I am now is worlds apart from the woman I was when I walked out of my marriage. Back then, I felt small and powerless, as though my worth depended on someone else's approval. Now, I know better. I've built a life rooted in my own values, driven by my own ambitions, and fueled by the belief that I deserve to be happy. As for my ex-husband, I haven't seen him since that day in my office. His voice, his presence, his existence. None of it holds any power over me anymore. I don't check for updates about his life, and I don't wonder if he's still consumed by regret. The chapter that once revolved around him has been closed for good, and I've long since moved on. What I've built since then is more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined during those dark moments of my past. The company continues to thrive, growing in ways that surprise even me. We've launched initiatives to give back to the community, including programs that support women entrepreneurs, something I'm particularly passionate about. But my success isn't just measured by professional achievements. It's in the relationships I've cultivated, the joy I find in everyday moments, and the peace that comes from knowing I've stayed true to myself. My personal life is no longer a tangled web of compromises and sacrifices. The people in my life now respect me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. I've surrounded myself with friends who lift me up, a partner who sees my strength as a gift, and mentors who challenge me to keep growing. One of my favorite moments in this new chapter came during a company retreat. I was speaking to a group of young professionals about resilience and leadership, sharing parts of my story that I had once been too ashamed to admit. As I looked out at the faces in the room, I realized how far I had come, not just professionally, but personally. I used to think strength meant never showing weakness, I told them. But what I've learned is that real strength is choosing yourself, even when it's hard. It's setting boundaries, walking away from what doesn't serve you, and believing that you deserve better. After the talk, one of the attendees approached me. She looked nervous, but determined. "Your story really resonated with me," she said. "It made me realize that I've been holding myself back because I'm afraid of failing. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to take risks." Her words reminded me of the countless people who had inspired me along the way, mentors, colleagues, and even strangers who had shown me that it was possible to rise above adversity. It felt like coming full circle, knowing that my journey could now inspire someone else. Looking back, I don't regret any part of my story, not even the painful moments. They taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. They pushed me to grow, to reevaluate my priorities, and to find the strength I didn't know I had. My journey wasn't about revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about reclaiming my life and building something beautiful out of the wreckage. And I did it, not for anyone else, but for me. As I sit in my office today, surrounded by the hum of a company I've helped nurture, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the people who supported me, for the challenges that shaped me, and most of all, for the courage to choose myself when it mattered most. The sun is setting outside, casting a warm glow over the city. It feels like a fitting metaphor, an ending and a beginning all at once. My past may have shaped me, but it no longer defines me. In the end, I chose myself. And I wouldn't change a thing.